Oh, you know what's weird? It says you're recording on my desktop, even though I have it on my phone.
Huh. By the way, it told me to let you know I'm recording you due to privacy issues. It gave me a little message in the corner.
Have you been watching the podcast? You've seen the earlier episodes?
I saw a bit of one. I haven't gotten a chance to see everything, though.
No, that's okay. It's just I've always started them by saying legally, I have to tell you that I'm recording. And I stopped for last week's episode with Nick because he usually gets pretty upset about it.
Jeez.
But you're keeping the tradition alive, which I appreciate.
Even if unintentionally. At some point, honestly, those going through all those podcasts is on my backlog of shit to do.
Yeah, you know what? It does take some time, but we found that it wasn't that bad. It only takes like about an hour, 2 hours. When you have to troubleshoot like we did today, it takes longer, obviously. But usually when Nick and Artur are around, they're pretty good with that stuff.
I mean, Artur, I think he's fairly computer savvy. I mean, this guy literally set up his whole IMAX situation.
Yeah, it was like the proudest life.
Dude, I still want to see that thing, man. It's like a beast.
Me too, man. Honestly, the way he was describing it, I feel like my editing flow would be so much better if I had that equipment.
Because I think the graphics card he put in that thing is insane.
Yeah, it was something like that. Okay, anyway, I think this is Talkies Netcast, episode 4. I'm Sam. Today we're joined by senior editor, right?
Yep. I think I'm senior editor. Yes, I'm senior editor. Artur's managing editor.
Okay, senior editor, Mathew. How do you pronounce your last name? Simoes?
Simoes.
Simoes?
Yeah, close enough.
Sorry, man.
It's fine. Most people get it wrong. But, yep, senior editor for Talkies Network, and when I end up doing it, I do the comic book reviews.
But you've done more than that. You've also done some film reviews too, right?
Yes, I have. And actually I've done a few connected to our main topic today, which is going to be Stephen King.
Yeah, so Nick called me today and he said, what are you guys going to talk about? I'm like, I don't know. We usually just wing it anyway. He says, I'm like, do you have any suggestions? He said, yeah, talk about Dr. Sleep. I'm like, okay, I've kind of seen like some ads on YouTube. Up until maybe about last week, I've never heard of Dr. Sleep. But dude, when I texted you and you said, oh, I'm actually a fan of the book, I'm like, oh, okay, perfect. So you're the guy that I needed to get on today.
Dude, it kind of works out. Dude, yeah. I didn't really knew the movie existed for like the last couple of weeks. I think it was when the first trailer dropped. I'm like, oh shit, this is a thing. Because the book is old. It's not like old. I think it came out, we're in 2019. I think it came out 6-7 years ago. And I'm interested to see the movie. I think it's going to be an interesting movie, not because it's an adaptation of a Stephen King novel, but because it's a sequel to The Shining, which you're getting a sequel to a Stanley Kubrick movie. I have no idea how that's going to turn out or if it's really going to work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like the only reason why I knew of anything about Stephen King was because of the Kubrick movie. Like that's where I got connected. And then I started reading into it a little bit more, preparing for this. And I found out that like Stephen King wasn't even so big on Kubrick's movie of his adaptation of The Shining. And Kubrick didn't even use Stephen King's script. He didn't even read it. He just went off and made it with someone else, which I found hilarious.
It's weird because, and I don't know, I love Stephen, like I don't know exhaust statements, I don't know how personally he took it, but he did make a whole new miniseries that he wrote to get it right, so maybe he took it very personally. But yeah, it's so different because the novel, its depiction of Jack Nicholson's character just isn't remotely close to the novel, because the novel, he's very much a guy who starts off as a troubled father, who has abusive tendencies and a bit of a drinking problem, who slowly goes off the deep end, whereas Jack Nicholson is kind of crazy from the get-go, and it's more like the hotel's bringing out what's been inside of him the whole time, which is not what the novel is.
Yeah, I also read that Stephen King was kind of upset by their casting of Jack Nicholson because he had just come off of doing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So
That's such a good
as the
movie.
crazy guy. So it didn't have that dramatic suspense or that dramatic delve into madness because you start off the movie being like, oh, that's Jack Nicholson. He's a crazy guy.
Yeah, and like you kind of like from the reputation, going in, he's kind of crazy. But Kubrick leans into it because I think by the end of the movie, the idea is Jack has always been a part of it, and it was just kind of bringing him home. Whereas in the book, he doesn't have that same connection to the hotel, and also, and this is why I find the whole concept of adapting Doctor Sleep as a sequel to Kubrick's The Shining strange. The novel has a heavy focus on the actual idea of The Shining and Danny, the kid's psychic powers, and Kubrick didn't really give a shit about that. And I don't know how you're going to do a sequel about this kid now grown up and have it connect to a movie where he's not that important of a character. Like Kubrick cared about Jack Torrance, he did not give a shit about his son. And I just don't. It's weird. Like I think I read in an interview or somewhere online, it's going to be a sequel to both the novel and the novel The Shining and the movie The Shining. And I'm like, they're two very different things, and they have different focuses. I don't know how you're going to pull this off successfully.
It might be a little bit confused. Do you know who's heading that project? Who's directing it and producing it?
Oh, what is his name? And I know this because your mind's it's similar to a guy from that comic book man show Kevin Smith. Mike Flanagan, I think, is the director of Doctor Sleep. And what actually, I'm genuinely curious because I know I've seen at least one. I feel like I've seen one thing by him.
Yeah, I have Mike Flanagan here. IMDb.
Oh, wait, no. Yeah, I've seen one movie. I think it's based on a short film. Yeah, I've seen one movie by him. It was Oculus, which is that Karen Gillan movie where it's about like an antique mirror. It's like cursed and it's responsible for like the destruction of like her family life. It wasn't bad. I wasn't super into the story, but the direction was pretty solid.
Oh, he also has credits for The Haunting of Hill House, that Netflix show that was pretty popular a couple years ago.
You know what? I've never seen that. I hear it's absolutely terrifying.
I heard about it. Yeah, I heard about it about 2 years ago, I think, at school, and everyone had really good things to say about it. I think it's still going on. But I'm not a horror guy, and everyone knows this. Like, I can't handle really scary things, and that's the reason why that Doctor Sleep kind of like flew over my head because Stephen King in general just never really rubbed me the right way in terms of the subject matter of the stories.
Weirdly enough, I never found Doctor Sleep to be that scary. Like when you like The Shining is scary. Doctor Sleep, honestly, it's more dark fantasy. I don't find it that scary of a book or a story. Like a lot of it is like the main premise is he's trying to protect this other kid who he meets that has the same abilities he does from this. I can't remember what they were. This traveling, roaming group of like circus folk who essentially feed off people with that shining psychic ability.
Okay.
And it's really just like a dark fantasy story. I never found, maybe the way they directed it might be scary because I know he does take some cues from Kubrick's The Shining, but Doctor Sleep on its own is not that scary of a book. Like The Shining's terrifying.
Yeah, it's crazy too to think that Stephen King, who's like written works span pretty much hundreds of stories.
I think he's on novel 50 something.
I don't know how you can adapt such long, in-depth stories into these formats of 1.5 to 2 hour movies. You miss a lot of that backstory, the important details that kind of I think people gravitate towards in his writing, Stephen King's writing.
And I think you see a lot of, I mean, the best example of that, honestly, is the It movies. where
Hmm.
you took a giant novel, like literally, I'm looking at the mass trade paperback edition on my shelf, which is huge on its own, and cram it. I mean, they did 2 movies, but they
Yeah.
still missed a bunch of stuff.
Hmm.
And I mean, there's only so much you can do. It doesn't help that King writes ridiculously long novels. Like they're
Yeah.
huge. He'll be like, "Oh, this novel started as a 20-page short story. Now it's a 600-page novel," and I'm like, you do you.
How big is it? Can I see it? Like, do you have it right there with you?
I can grab it right now.
Yeah. So you're actually quite a Stephen King fan then of the books.
I literally.
Oh yeah, that's it's pretty substantial.
Yeah, I think my mass market it's like 1,500 pages, and this is just a mass market edition.
Wow.
Like I read it first at a library. It was a bigger one, but still, I think if you do like the regular size version, it's like 800, 700 pages, 800,000 pages, something like that. But
Hmm.
honestly, I like Stephen King. I like most Stephen King novels. Admittedly, his latest stuff has been hit or miss.
Yeah.
But in terms of media adaptation, holy shit! Like lately, it's been insane. He has the 2 It movies,
Hmm.
Castle Rock, which is essentially people doing remixes of his work set in the universe of all his novels. You have
Hmm.
Doctor Sleep coming out. He has one crime series. I think the first book in the trilogy. It's actually right over here. Yeah, Mr. Mercedes is like it was him trying to do detective fiction, and he has 3 of those. They were turned into a TV show. I think it's on season 2 or 3. He has his latest novel, The Outsider. I'm pretty sure. I don't know if it has a trailer out. I'm pretty sure that one's pretty far into development. So that's what 3 TV shows, the It movies, Doctor Sleep. He had Pet Cemetery recently, which I haven't seen, but
Neither
it
have
is on
I.
my list because it's a good novel. I'm not a fan of the original movie, though that maybe just the cheesy effects do not work for me.
It's crazy to think too that Stephen King, his movies are being remade. So not only are they film adaptations of his books that he wrote a long time ago, they're adaptations of the adaptations. They're remakes. It's pretty surreal how that guy's like literary works have gone so far and then they keep on coming back every 20 years.
And I think a part of it is as you go further in time, you're allowed to do more things in film. Like I don't
Mhm.
know if you've seen the original It miniseries. It was on I think it was on NBC. Like it's
Mhm.
tame. There's I mean, granted, even the movies cut out some of the more diabolical things from the book,
Yeah.
but the NBC miniseries they did was really NBC, ABC. It was one of the networks, but
Yeah.
it's super tame. They cut out a lot of stuff. Those new movies, like a lot of the dark elements, were put back in. Like
Mhm.
the beginning, when you see the little kid Georgie get
Yeah.
killed, like you see it rip. Spoiler alert! If you haven't seen it, Chapter 1, the kid gets his arm ripped off. It's in the book. You don't see it in the original miniseries that they aired on network television. But now you can do these big budget rated R movies and you can show a demon clown tearing kids apart. So I think
Yeah. That was his
like
deal, right? He would eat the kids, no?
yeah, and now that you
Very
have more
frustrated
freedom,
past.
literally like you eat these kids, and now that you have more freedom to do stuff like this on film, especially with a bigger budget, it, I'd say honestly remake all the Stephen King stories that were depicted with certain constraints, and I think it was a big one just because there's only so much you can do. Like that's like I think the censor notes they had in terms of what they could do and not do was insane. And I think the impetus to remake a lot of these stories is because they can pretty much do whatever they want and they
Yeah.
don't have the same limits.
Yeah, and CGI and animation is just it's so far advanced than whatever they could have dreamed of 20 years ago.
Oh my god, you have to see. It's like part 2 of the miniseries, and I think they once again spoiler. Don't watch this. Don't listen to this podcast if you haven't seen the It movies.
Oh man, Nick and Artur ruin movies for me all the time, especially horror movies. But to be fair, I don't really go for a lot of the horror movies, but I still haven't seen It Chapter 2. I saw the first one and I really enjoyed it.
Chapter 2 is a solid movie. I don't quite like it as much, but the one thing you notice is at the end of the movie, like it's in the book, it's in the miniseries. There's the big climactic battle,
Mhm.
and because of CGI, the like Pennywise looks pretty damn good in his kind of more monstrous appearance. If
Mhm.
you watch the old miniseries, it looks like a giant. It's like a model that someone's moving around and playing with. It looks terrible.
It's because it probably is.
It is, and just the fact that like you said, CGI, the fact that censor limitations have disappeared, I think you can really adapt Stephen King's work to its fullest. And more
Yeah.
importantly, you could do it on TV because now you have the cable channels where you can get away with a lot of stuff, and you don't have to kind of hide the gruesome details of King's work.
Yeah, that's true. Like after 8:30 or 9 o'clock, you can pretty much show anything on TV.
Yeah, like you can pretty much get away with anything nowadays, depending on
Yeah,
the network
it's
or
a
the
weird thing
cable
for
channel.
sure. And there's the movie channels that have no limitations on them.
Oh my god, you can do anything on HBO. Like
Yeah.
actually no, you can do anything on HBO except I don't know if you've seen or heard of the AMC series Preacher, but
Yeah.
that was the one thing HBO said no to.
Really?
Yeah, they were pitched in. They're like, we're not doing this. It's too religiously controversial. And I'm like, okay, if HBO won't do it, no one will. And then AMC said yes, and I'm like, why not? I didn't like if HBO said no. I'm genuinely surprised you said yes.
Hmm. Yeah, it was kind of an odd one. I don't know too much about the show, but I'm surprised that HBO, let's face it, their network is known for like pornography, like pretty
I
much.
mean, Game of Thrones has its moments.
No, but even like Spartacus back in the day, that was HBO, right? I think it was.
No, that was I think that was Stars Entertainment
Oh,
and or Showtime. I can't remember. I think it was one of those because I'm watching right now. What was it? It was recommended to me by friends. Power, and I think that's on Stars. And yeah, like it's a great show, but
mhm.
occasionally there are sex scenes that verge on softcore pornography.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. They can really get away with a lot. I'm just thinking of some of the shows that they did like back in the day. Like I was a big fan of Entourage.
Oh man, I
Like
actually I
all
don't
the,
think they went. I don't think they did too much on Entourage. Like there was
yeah, actually,
nudity.
thinking back at it, I don't think it was that bad. I think there might have been a little bit of nudity, but even then I don't really remember.
I think it's gotten more over, like more of the recent shows. Like I know Game of Thrones was the big one,
Yeah.
and
What did you think about the end? You were a fan of Game of Thrones, right?
I enjoyed it. I wasn't
Yeah.
a, I wasn't a super fan of it. Just like you're not a huge horror guy, I'm not a huge like high fantasy guy.
Yeah, fair
But
enough.
I did finally get into it, and I think I started. I think I watched the last couple seasons live, and I binged. I think the first four.
I think I was the same actually.
Yeah, because I feel like it's something I kind of was forced to get into. I know Nick and Artur really loved it, and they gave me shit every time. I'm like, Game of Thrones, who cares? But for the ending, honestly, fantastic ideas, but
Mhm.
they spent so little time developing it, it just fell apart very fast.
It
And the
was that
finale,
way.
mm,
For me it was that last season, I think.
yeah. Well, actually, I'd say even the one before it, you saw the cracks of them. And I don't know why they did it. I think the rumor was like they wanted to go do Star Wars, but then
Yeah, that fell
but then
through.
yeah, and I did they have the Netflix deal now, but they really wanted to wrap Game of Thrones really quickly because I think
Mhm.
the last three seasons of that show has like four. If you go by the pacing of what came before, that's like 30, 40 episodes worth of content, and they burned through it in maybe 10
Yeah.
or 12. And I think it suffered a lot for it because you have a lot of character arcs that weren't fleshed out, and I felt like you're missing a lot of emotional beats that would have given you a good finale versus Daenerys just going insane in like actually I don't think you ever see her go mad. I think it's like a switch. Like it
No,
goes on.
people, yeah, a lot of people have been bringing that up, or when it was a thing, because this is old news now. But when the
You're right.
internet outcried for Daenerys and Game of Thrones, you could kind of see flashes of her descending into madness, like before she even killed everyone in King's Landing over there.
You get a bit of it, but I
Yeah,
feel
Bill,
like
see she's a little more hot tempered. You can see she has a little bit less regard for people. Like when she kills all the slavers that was like kind of justified. But then I'm pretty sure she did something else, and everyone was like, okay, like maybe we should pump the brakes on this.
Oh, I think it was when
Especially,
she, I think it's when she started lighting people on fire for like not agreeing with her.
yeah, when Varys was killed.
Yeah, and then there was I think another character before that, and I think they were, I know they were like big.
In previous seasons, but there was a moment where, like, is you have the father who's in charge of the army and his son, and the father's like, to hell with you, I'm not going to submit, to do whatever you want. And she turns to the son, and the son's like, I'm doing the same thing, and she sets them both on fire.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's excessive. And I think everybody around her's like, okay, I mean, I get the one person, but did you have to set the sun on fire too?
Yeah, that's right. And so when people were saying that it was too quick of a switch, I think they actually kind of did a good job with the limited amount of time that they had at showing these flashes of madness until her like complete descent into it.
I think you get the build up to an extent. I think for me, the reason I kind of refer to it as a switch is there's her treating genuinely bad people or people who she sees as being bad in a cruel manner where I'm like, you know what, that's good development. It's when you get to that final scene where she starts burning alive civilians that I'm like, that's a level of madness you have not quite built her up to. I feel like that's the step too far where she goes from just killing people who are against her to literally killing anybody to prove a
Yeah.
point. And I'm like, that's a step too far. I feel like that's where I need the connective tissue because she was always in support of the people and she was extremely violent to those who would abuse them. So her like if she tortured Cersei to death, I'd be like perfectly within character. But her purposely killing innocent civilians, I'm like, I needed more of a downfall to get me to that point logically. And I think that's what doesn't quite work with that last season.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I never read the books. I was just going along with the show as it was airing live for the past like 4 or 5 seasons, like you said. But I kind of had an inkling that because she was the Mad King's daughter, that she was gonna descend into that madness. That's where the show was going. That Jon Snow was always gonna be the hero because you don't bring a character back from the dead just to make him be like someone's errand boy, you know? Like he
Oh,
had to have been the hero in the end.
oh yeah. I mean, you're going off who is his name? Joseph Campbell's monomyth. The hero always dies and comes back. At least in this case, is literally. But
Yeah.
no, you're not. You're not wrong. And the teasing was there.
hmm I
I don't
I
know.
think that was also another big issue that people had with the last season because John really didn't have much to say or do in that last season.
See, that's actually where I argue against that. Like the one thing I like about that last season and the finale was
Mhm.
John. Like I like that ending where he's like, okay, admittedly, people have their issues with the relationship. I get it; it's kind of creepy, and the fact that no one calls out how creepy it is weird.
Yeah.
But like the moment he's like, I do love you, but at the same time, or no, is it he had his not even that he had his like I have like he's a guy who's bound by honor. I swear my oath to you, and
Yeah.
I'm going to do something that is completely out of my character, but also within it because I'm going to do the right thing, even though it betrays kind of every aspect of my being. And I'm like, and he like hates himself for it, and I'm like, that's actually good because
Mhm.
that's exactly what he would do, and that's
Yeah.
exactly how he would feel. And I found that quite powerful. Like I thought the one part of the finale that made sense was him and what he did and how he felt about it.
Yeah, those are my favorite parts of definitely the last episode or 2 episodes when they're storming the city and they see that Daenerys has lost it and she's destroying everything, and then they just stop. There was a point where John was leading his men and they confront the people that are protecting the city, and they just put their weapons down and they stop, and he's like, "Okay, we don't have to do this. Like it's over now." And then they just start going, and you could see him not wanting to partake in that because it's senseless killing, and that was never John's deal. John was always the honorable one. Like you said, he was always true to his word. He always did the right thing.
And it works. Like it makes sense. And also, Kit Harington's performance completely nailed it.
Yeah.
Like he's
Yeah.
great. I'm glad the Marvel movies are getting him, even though I have no idea what Eternals is going to be. And
Mhm.
I don't think I've ever read an Eternals comic book in my entire life. But no, like honestly, I feel like that last season leaves a sour taste in people's mouths. Granted, I don't think it was a great way to end the series, but you're
Mhm.
right. It's not nearly as bad as people say it is.
Yeah, I didn't mind it as much. I just, like it's not worth getting angry over, especially when you hear people or the rumors saying that these guys were really just preparing to do Star Wars. So they want to wrap it up quickly.
Okay, that one I kind of somewhat believe just because they're like, oh, we can do it in 6 episodes, and I'm like, you can't. Like,
That's too much. We talked
uh,
about Stephen King writing long. George R. R. Martin writes very long.
okay, like I've read one Game of Thrones book, and I'm not reading the rest because I can't do it. They're too long. Like they're insane, and I will give this. It's his prose style. If you read it, and I'm sure anyone who listens to this who likes George R. R. Martin will either disagree with me or hate me for it, but he goes into detail to an extent where I'm like, okay, I don't give a shit about the food, like like all these details. Just get on with the story. Like you've set the scene. Take a break. Just make characters talk. Like his prose is so detailed to the point where I get bored.
Yeah, that's always been my favorite part of books. Just getting on with it, sure, describing the atmosphere, describing what's going on around them. But really, I don't fully enjoy a book until I have like real juicy conversation to pick up the pieces of what's going on.
Yeah,
Really.
like there's only so much you can do with, and his car was this color with rust on this part of the car, and there was a nick on the steering wheel. Like I don't give it. Like no, that's not necessary. Like I'm reading. I'm trying to finally finish American Tabloid by James Elroy, and his prose, like he cuts out all unnecessary details. Like he's to the point, and he doesn't do any of that long, extended, winded explanation. Like he'll describe to you a scene in a sentence, and he'll just have characters start talking.
Yeah,
And
that's good. It's almost like screenplays in a way, where screenplays don't really have a lot of prose. It's
it,
just
it
it's not for you to decide as like the actor reading it, because you tell the story with how you're conveying the words that are on there with your emotion and then with whatever action is there, but it's to the point, it's direct. Like, have you ever read a script and just been like, why can't all books be this concise to the point?
like I have, and as much as a part of me is like, oh, you're saying that because you're lazy, and I'm like, well, no, some books are unnecessarily long.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's why people have gravitated before the series to the books of George R. R. Martin, just because they like the detail. They like how meticulous he is with explaining all the nitty-gritty.
And I will give that, like he can build a world. I think he has like 2 history books on Westeros out.
It's amazing. I've only watched YouTube videos on it, and even those span hours. Like, I can only imagine what the source material looks like.
Oh my god, I could imagine the actual if he did like a full timeline. Because you can tell Game of Thrones is the kind of thing where he's like, I have the beginning of creation up until the end of time mapped out, and it's like all set.
Yeah, it's like those big story Bibles that they have. I think they had that for like the Marvel universe when they were doing their movies, right? The big story Bible.
Actually, I think like I can't remember if this was like an exaggeration by Kevin Feige, but I'm pretty sure they have like a scroll, and it starts with like
Really?
the earliest significant event and moves forward.
Wow.
But I think that's going to change because I know the Eternals movie they have planned is supposed to like hop through time. So I have
Mhm.
no idea how that's all going to mesh.
What what are your thoughts? Last week, Nick and we talked about this sort of controversy with Martin Scorsese because I was just coming off from seeing The Irishman, of saying that
Oh
Marvel
yeah,
movies are just theme park movies. They're just amusement park movies. Francis Ford Coppola said I don't remember if he called them despicable or it was something along those lines. But I think the general consensus was that it's not cinema. Where do you stand on that? Because Nick and I, we couldn't really get a definitive answer. I think we both ended up thinking that Marvel movies are cinema, and they also are amusement park movies. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because that's just what they're for. Like, where do you stand on that?
As a diehard superhero fan, I do naturally disagree with those directors.
Mhm.
Granted, I do find it interesting how the original statements were very harsh and to the point, and then
Yeah,
as time goes on, they're like, "Oh no, I really meant this," and I'm like, "Really?" Because what you said was really mean. Like literally, it's like it's not cinema, and I'm like, that's kind of disrespectful to everybody who worked on these movies, but okay. And
yeah.
then like I think Scorsese's latest comments have been more accurate, and I do agree with the later ones. I do think there's cinema. I mean, they're movies, just like James. Like people may disagree with me. I greatly dislike James Patterson novels. I still think they're books. I don't think they're very good, but I still think they're books. I do think the Marvel movies are cinema. I think they're a very particular kind of cinema. And I don't think amusement park is the right word for it because movies like them have existed in the past. Admittedly, Marvel movies are crowd pleasers. They're meant
Mhm.
to appeal to as many people as humanly possible.
Mhm.
And that's not something new for film. I think the only unique thing about them is they build a whole and complete universe, which hasn't been done before and has not been done successfully since. I think that's the one thing that makes them unique. And I don't think that's a negative thing, considering many people have tried to do it and they've all failed miserably. So it's not something that's easy to do and an easy thing to market. Where I do stand with Scorsese, and I think it was him or Coppola, one of them said this. The one thing I will give Marvel is they don't take risks, which is true, and it's the one thing that does. If I had to pick one thing that irritates me about the MCU, they're not willing to try new and different things,
Mhm.
and it's a flaw, and it's one of the reasons I kind of got bummed out that Disney bought out Fox because their new X-Men movie model was basically, with the exception of the main series, let directors do whatever they want and
Yeah.
twist the mythology to whatever they want. Like Logan was a neo noir western, New Mutants
That
was
was
a
a
horror
big thing.
movie, like Noah Hawley was going to do a Doctor Doom movie, which, based on watching everything else he's done, would have been some trippy visual spectacle.
Mhm.
And that was their new model: just be creative, be unique. And I thought that's how you do superhero movies going forward because it gives you something interesting. And I like DC's doing it with Joker. And I think the one criticism you can give Disney and Marvel is they don't try to go outside the box, which they don't have to do with all their movies, but you can do it once in a while and take a risk. And you don't have to actually spend that much money to do it. I mean, Joker didn't cost that much money to make, and I think it's close to or at $1 billion in revenue.
Yeah.
But I think that it is cinema, but the one valid criticism I'll give is Marvel movies don't take risks. And they've been kind of tame. Like, I remember watching Iron Man, and I mean, granted, it wasn't direct, but it did go after the military industrial complex. Captain America Winter Soldier dealt with issues of privacy.
Mhm.
And I don't think you've had a Marvel movie do something like that in a while. Like they tend to be big, funny superhero smash ups, which are enjoyable. And I mean, in like Endgame made me feel emotions. Very few movies have made me felt due to the
Mhm.
emotional attachment I've developed for those characters over the years. But they don't really do much in terms of risk taking. And that's something I would give those directors, and they're right. Like Marvel movies are cinema, but they do need to start trying to do different things. And I think if if superhero movies ever do crash and burn, it's going to be because majority of them are Marvel movies, and eventually people are going to kind of take in that you're doing the same things over and over again. And even if you do a good job of it, eventually you want to see something new. And I think if they do crash and burn as a franchise, that's probably going to be the reason.
Yeah, I think the issue that I had with it, and maybe to put a little bit of pushback back at what you're saying is, I think my issue with the whole Marvel movie thing is that they're all a formula. It's like a cookie cutter formula for success. It's so weird to think that you can make like what is it, like 23 movies so far.
And they're all remarkably similar.
Yeah. For me, when someone says that isn't art, I can kind of agree with them and be like, you know what? At that point, that just might be emulation, reproduction. It's just coming out of the machine. It's like just a new iPhone. There's nothing special or arts like
Yeah,
significant artistically about it.
yeah, the iPhone 11.
Pardon?
The iPhone 11. Literally.
Every iPhone, man. What's the difference between our phones every year besides like maybe an extra lens on the camera that you're not going to use?
I don't even know anymore. Like even like TVs year to year, they're pretty much the same freaking thing. Like you
Yeah,
need you need you need like 5 years to do a big tech jump. But for the cookie cutter thing, I will say, and it's actually really funny, a lot of those superhero origin stories line up. Part of it also, it doesn't help that these stories were created by a handful, like a few dudes in a very short time span. Like one of
yeah.
the hilarious things is when people say, and I think it was brought up, the Doctor Strange movie is pretty much like Iron Man. If you
Mhm.
read the original Doctor Strange comic, it's the same thing as Iron Man. A rich, successful asshole has an injury, and as a result of the injury, to fix it, they gain a version of superpowers and they grow as a human. Like
That
these,
sounds almost like Batman as well.
yeah, like these characters, like if you look even in their source material, it doesn't help. They all kind of follow the same trend, and I think it's hard to even deal with that in film when what you're working with to begin with is all very similar to each other. Like I think one of the most unique Marvel heroes in terms of origin stories is probably Spider-Man, just because he's one of the few superheroes who started off as a teenager without being a sidekick. But yeah, they're very cookie cutter, and I think the closest you got to breaking it was Endgame of recent, but that's only because it had to be a very different kind of movie to do its job.
Mhm.
But yeah, a lot of these movies follow the same tracks. Like I don't watch, like I haven't seen Ant-Man and the Wasp because like I'm sure it's good, but from what I see, it basically just looks like the Ant-Man movie, and I'm like, I have no interest in watching that again.
Yeah. Well, I was saying that last week. My girlfriend kept on asking me, we have to watch all the Marvel movies. We have to watch all the Marvel movies. And what I told Nick, pardon?
Hmm?
Did you say she's right?
No, I'm like, Jesus Christ, that's a lot of movies.
Oh yeah, and I what I told Nick was you probably couldn't pay me an amount of money to watch every single one because it's just it seems like too much. And my movie tastes, I'm not very avant-garde. I don't really care for the artsy stuff. Like I'm pretty pedestrian in pretty much all my tastes in life. I'm a pretty like medium vanilla kind of guy. Not vanilla. Like I do appreciate difference, but for the most part, I'm a pretty agreeable guy when it comes to my tastes and things. Like my issue with them is probably that they're just too similar. They're too similar. I like Guardians of the Galaxy. If I could like redeem myself in a certain way, I like those movies. Those were fun.
But it's because they also stand out as being something different when you compare them to everything else.
I think that's what it is. They're not like the typical, superhero with the same backstory that was conceived in like the 1940s, and they go through the same struggles, and it's all the same. I think that's my issue with Marvel movies as a whole. They're just too similar. When Scorsese says they're not art, I can kind of see what he means because this guy's used to making like some real like weird hard hitting stuff that isn't for everyone, but just like the Marvel movies aren't for everyone, although they kind of are. So I don't know where I'm going with this one. It's a weird, it's a tricky thing. It's like walking on eggshells because I don't want to completely flat out say these aren't good movies or they aren't art because they're successful. And maybe they're successful for popularity's sake, or maybe they're successful because they're actually worth watching and worth enjoying as a fan of comic books, as a fan of movies or whatever. But I just don't know where the line is kind of drawn between art and like a commercial success.
It's a tricky line, and I think it doesn't help that the Marvel movies are designed to make money because they cost so much to make. And like Joker could fail, and I think they wouldn't be as mad about it because it costs like next to nothing to produce. But if you're spending 200 or 300 million dollars on a superhero movie, you kind of have to make the money back. There's no room for you failing financially.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, the movies are kind of trapped. Like, I think even if you read like superhero comics, they do weird creative things, and they can afford to do that because comics don't sell a lot. So the financial responsibility isn't as huge, but for the price of these movies, you got to play it safe. And it also doesn't help that Marvel does a lot of origin stories. And I got to admit, like, unless they were created in like the late 70s, 80s, 90s, a lot of these superheroes have very similar origin stories.
Mhm.
And the more you do them, the more noticeable it is. Like, honestly, that's why my most anticipated superhero movie is going to be Matt Reeves' Batman, because he's like, I'm not doing another origin. In fact, they're not even doing supervillain origins, because I'm pretty sure he's cast Riddler, Catwoman, Penguin. I think I don't know. I don't know if Colin Farrell's officially been cast or he's still rumored, but like
Yeah.
Penguin's going to be in it, and I think they're looking to bring in like Harvey Dent, Two-Face, and you know what? He's going for it. He's not doing an origin, and I think that's going to help a little bit.
Mhm.
And he's also leaning into the whole Batman's a detective, so I'm doing a detective movie, which gives it a little bit of a different vibe. And I think that's what Marvel fails at doing, and why certain projects at DC and Fox have been successful. Superheroes are incredibly malleable. They share a few genre traits. They have their own certain amount of tropes, but superheroes fit into pretty much every single genre, and they're very malleable. Like the Fantastic Four are high concept sci-fi. Spider-Man is wow, fuck, what would Spider-Man be? Spider-Man's a mix of everything. It depends on who he's fighting. But Iron Man is science fiction.
Logan was a Western, Nick said
Logan
last
was,
week.
yeah, Daredevil's film noir. The latest Netflix series has followed the Frank Miller comics, and like Frank Miller, he revolutionized Daredevil by saying, "What if I made Daredevil the star of a film noir story?" And I think superheroes can be really good if you really are willing to mix it up and comb through genre, because you can pretty much do anything. I mean, look at Batman. Batman started every. He's been around for, I think he just hit his 80th anniversary recently. I could be wrong about that. I don't know. I know Detective Comics at issue 1000, but back to my point, Batman's been used in pretty much every story you can possibly think of.
Yeah.
And these characters are incredibly malleable. And I think the problem is Marvel has yet to be willing to take the risk and actively play with what you can do.
Mhm.
Because, like, literally, just all you have to do is take a hero and filter it through something else, and you'll have an interest. And, okay, granted, I'm kind of making a cookie cutter mold in my head right now, but like, I'm like, yeah,
You're putting
take
it
the
through a different.
superhero.
You're seeing it
Yeah.
through a different lens, which actually you started to convince me like, oh, maybe superhero movies don't have to be this cookie cutter mold. Maybe you could have the same hero, but you put him in a different circumstance, which I suppose they did do in a way with the Marvel movies. Obviously, I'm not an expert. I only saw like 4 or 5 of them. But they do put them in different situations, especially when they do these big crossover movies. So I could be swayed on it for sure.
I feel like superheroes and you like the I mean, even the basic ones appeal to me, but I think to really make them worth doing, you have to be willing to take risks and do crazy things. Like, there are some weird things you can do with superheroes. I mean, like, they're doing the Moon Knight series, and Moon Knight literally is, I mean, objectively looks like a ripoff of Batman. But what he does, he's basically a Batman if he wore a white costume and had a crescent moon on his belt and forehead. But I think the recent stories have really played with the fact that he has split personality disorder. And if you do a show where you really focus on that, and maybe even use it in terms of like an unreliable narrator, that's doing a superhero series that A is about something interesting, and B is being presented in an interesting way.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can just make him a cookie cutter Batman. Two different options. I'm really hoping they don't do cookie cutter Batman.
Well, I think a lot of people would say, in regards to Batman, like Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy was like definitely art, or it was more artfully done.
And if you look at what he did, he basically said, okay, what if I did Batman in the real world without superpowers and superhero stuff? And and it worked, and it gave him something unique and interesting. Because he basically said, what if I take Batman and do this? And you got something cool. Versus saying, what if I took Batman and had him fight Joker again? And you end up with another just boring Batman movie. I think you kind of have to take the hero and be willing to do something interesting with them. Because then you if you don't do that, you end up with something really boring. Like I think, like Captain America Winter Soldier, they said, what if I did it as a political thriller? Mm-hmm. And it worked really well. Civil War was an enjoyable movie that has a ridiculous amount of logic flaws. Like, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's so many leaps of logic in that movie. It's unbelievable. I think there's literally a moment where the villain says, like, I planned for you to come, and I'm just like, but what if he didn't? And this entire film falls apart. Like that movie has so many logic flaws. Uh-huh. But and even that one, I think they leaned away from political thriller, and I think because they did the whole Civil War thing, it became a bit more of a blockbuster. Because admittedly, I don't think Civil War has the same appeal as Winter Soldier. Mm. And I think it's because Winter Soldier, they really tried to do something new and interesting. And it's tough. Like, I think it's tough. And it's tough to do right. And you have to find a way to make these characters work. And it's not like I'm not trying to infantilize what's been done by these directors and writers, but it's not something that's insanely difficult and impossible. I mean, I love the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, and they basically said, what if I put Spider-Man in a John Hughes movie? And it worked. Mm-hmm. Like, it's taking these heroes and giving them different perspectives, and it's not hard to do. It's just, are you willing to take the risk financially? Yeah. Because like Joker, that's not a financial risk remotely, and it made a shit ton of money. And I think it really comes down to them giving the space to do more creative things without worrying about money, which does come down to lower budget movies, which I think you can do a good job on. Like, I'm down to see a Punisher movie with Joker's budget and just giving them free reign to do whatever they want.
Yeah. And Joker? No, keep on going.
Oh, I was gonna say, Josh, I want you're switching gears to Joker, and I want to see what you thought of it if you've seen it.
Of Joker?
Yeah.
Oh man, so, as I was telling Nick last week, I was in the movie theater for The Irishman, and a lady had turned to me, and she just started talking, as you do at these things sometimes when the screening is a little bit late to run. And she was talking to me about The Lighthouse. Have you seen that one with Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe?
I have not. It's literally, I have like 6 movies to watch in theaters. It's on my list.
Yeah, that one's so on my radar, but I just haven't had the time to actually go out and see it. And she was telling me how Willem Dafoe's performance blows Joaquin Phoenix's performance out of the water. Like, she just says it's night and day, and she realizes Joaquin Phoenix did an amazing job. But to answer your question, no, I actually didn't see the Joker. I don't know, for whatever reason, because I was a fan of I'm a Scorsese fan, like I'm a fanboy, like tried and true, and and so I was a fan of the King of Comedy. I was obviously a fan of Taxi Driver, although that one.
Oh, so you've already seen Joker?
Pardon?
So you've seen those movies.
Exactly, and that's
You've
what I'm saying. I never felt compelled to really go out of my way to go watch it in theater because I didn't have to, because I kind of knew that it was these two movies put into one, just with like a DC twist.
Like
So,
you're not wrong. You're not wrong. It's literally Taxi Driver and King of Comedy were made into the same movie,
yeah.
and you just made Joker the main character.
With
And,
Bob as the same character in the King of Comedy.
and it's hilarious. Like they're basically like tit for tat the same movies. I think the only differences, and it's the only issues I had with Joker, there are elements of that movie that seem like they're ripped out of a comic book and have like no place, and I feel like they have no place in that kind of Scorsese-esque world they were creating. But if you remove that, it's literally a Martin Scorsese movie with Joker in it. Like, and then like I have to watch it again, but it's one of those movies where it challenges you to think, what's the line between homage and just blatant ripoff?
That's an interesting point, man. And it's crazy to think that someone could criticize Marvel for doing that, pretty much that, ripping their own stories off and making a ton of money, and then coming out and criticizing and not coming out and criticizing this movie, which did the exact same thing. It ripped off these movies that it's based off of with a decent twist, granted, but it made a lot of money. Like,
And like I know people are probably going to disagree with that and say, "Oh, he's taking inspiration," but like, goddamn, the similarities are so close. Like a struggling comedian goes crazy.
yeah,
Like the unreliable narrative as he kind of goes to seek his own form of justice. I mean, it's basically Taxi Driver and King of Comedy.
yeah. Artur told me that it was beat for beat Taxi Driver.
It's not even beat for beat Taxi Driver. It's beat for beat Taxi Driver mixed with King of Comedy, or maybe like it's basically both movies put together. And then if you threw Joker in, and oddly enough, though, like if you ignore that, it's not a bad movie.
Yeah.
But it's a movie where I need to see it. When it comes out on DVD, I'm probably gonna buy it just to rewatch it if it doesn't come hit a streaming service first, because yeah, it's one of those movies where I'm like, have you broken the fine line? It's like when I watch Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and I'm like, okay, you're basically just doing the same thing over and over again. There's no new story. You're just redoing what you've done before. And I have to watch Joker again to see if it falls in that category. But I think it's a film you should watch just because it's essentially two Scorsese movies melted together with Joker in the middle.
Yeah,
like I feel like I feel like you'll either like it or hate it, depending on your perspective.
you know, I'd probably like it, and I'd probably benefit from seeing it in theaters, just because I think movies are always better on the big screen.
That is true.
Yeah, it is. It's an experience, you know.
And admittedly, I'm be honest, I do most of my like Oscar film round catch up on Crave TV. Sir?
On Joker, my favorite quote, and you've probably heard me say it a billion times, is good artists create, but great artists steal. And like, when we talk about Joker being beat for beat these two other movies, it's almost like, well, did they do it in a sly enough way to where you could say it's its own independent thing? The way that you're describing it, and Artur and Nick were describing it, it doesn't seem that it was subtle enough to call it like a great art.
I don't think it is, just because when you watch it, the first thing you think is, okay, it's a Martin Scorsese movie if you put Joker in it. Like, it's the first thing I think. Actually, I think the differences between them is Martin Scorsese had better editors work on his movies, because literally, I remember watching Joker when it started. My first thought was, how many times do you have to cut to a close up of his face? Like some of the editing in that movie I find to be very rough, especially towards the beginning.
Maybe that's the point, though, because I know a lot of, and I'm not very familiar with Todd Phillips' work, but a lot of directors who are trying to give you that sort of uncomfortable closeness, they'll do cuts like that. They do their framing like that. They'll do it extra close, so that way, one, you feel like you're uncomfortable, and two, you're also kind of in their head. You want to kind of be like as close as you can to like what they're experiencing. I didn't see the movie, so I can't. Maybe it is
Yeah.
just like under, but I think it probably adds to the level of discomfort because when it's such a one person centric movie, there's really only so much you can do framing wise to convey those sorts of feelings apart from telling the story. So
Yeah.
visually, I think that those like weird, they may seem weird, but they're probably for the purpose of making you feel uncomfortable and actually getting inside your own head thinking about what's going on the screen.
I got to rewatch Joker.
I gotta watch it, so maybe we should go see it.
Dude, honestly, like I feel like it's a movie I'm gonna get when it comes out, like on DVD, just because I feel like it's something I want to own for what
Yeah.
it, like, no matter how I feel about it on a second viewing, for what it represents, in that, like, flaws or not, that's a
Mhm.
ballsy move.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think if you haven't read about it, Todd Phillips talked about the development process of making this movie, and it was not fun because Joker's such a marketable character.
Mhm.
And DC's like, do you have to do that? Can't you do that? And I think I was talking to Nick about it after I watched it, and I made the comment, like, this movie, like, they say it's Gotham City, it's New York. It
Mhm.
does not remotely feel like a different place. It's like it's New York City. And Nick's
Yeah.
like, and Nick told me that apparently it was New York, and then DC had him change it to be, or Warner Brothers had him change it to be Gotham. And I'm like, I feel it. Because you never feel like it's like this other place. It's New York City, which doesn't help with the Scorsese comparisons. But
But wasn't Gotham City directly modeled after New York? Wasn't it just supposed to be this like gritty metropolis?
depends who you're looking at. I know a model for it has recently been Chicago in terms of filming. In terms of
Okay.
conception, I think it was New York, because I
Yeah.
know the grittiness of Gotham was shaped by guys like Frank Miller in the 80s, and a lot of it did come from the fact that New York, in terms of crime, was not great in the 1980s. And Miller, despite growing up in Vermont, is a diehard New Yorker, and he was living there when all that shit was going down, and that did impact the way he wrote his Batman. And literally, the modern conception of Gotham City is this shitty, crime-ridden, horrible place to live did come from the Frank Miller comics.
Yeah.
And yeah, literally, the 80s crime wave in New York City pretty much crafted what Gotham is to modern conception.
Man, it's crazy to think of like how your surroundings influence how you write and how you come up with ideas. Like what was Stephen King? What was he experiencing when he was coming up with all these crazy ideas of like supernatural happenings and
It's
just
not even that, like, ever, like, and I don't know too much about his recent books, but I know, like, his classic stuff, everything has an emotional core to it. I know Misery was came from this weird experience he had with a fan, where they were really, like, they made him uncomfortable, and I think his brain naturally said, what if they kidnap me and lock me in a room and maybe write a book for them? And like that, the experience of that horrible writer fan relationship came from that uncomfortable moment with his own fan. Pet Cemetery, I think, and don't quote me on it, it had to do with the fact that I think they lived near like a road, and I think it was the knowledge of, like, his what, I can't remember which kid. I think Stephen King has three. I think it was one of his sons just, like, wandering out and getting hit by a car. Or, like, his son was almost hit by a car, and then, like, his mind naturally went to Pet Cemetery. Like, his mind naturally said, and eventually landed in the story of Pet Cemetery, where someone tries to bring their kid back to life to disastrous results.
Mhm.
And I think there are others. Like, I know the Gunslinger books came from a poem he read when he was in school. The Shining. Actually, no, Cujo was cocaine.
Of course.
Like, he fully admits to not remembering writing that book,
like
um, which I
like
find
everything
hilarious.
Truman Capote wrote.
Yeah, it's like, oh, what's the inspiration for your book? Drugs. It's
Man,
whatever I thought, all the drugs.
have you seen that thing like Truman Capote's daily routine?
Oh my god, I have. It's like looking at it's like similar to Hunter S. Actually, I think Hunter S. Thompson's daily routine was worse.
No, it was Hunter S. Sorry, I'm mixing them up. It was
Is it
Hunter
right?
S. Hunter S. Thompson's
Yeah,
routine would involve like waking up at like 3 in the afternoon, starting your day with like cocaine, orange juice, cigarettes, more cocaine, grass to
actually,
take the edge off, Chivas Regal with ice. He made like snow cones with cognac. Like,
I have a collection of interviews from Thompson. I wonder if that's actually mentioned in there. I just found on the internet. But yeah, it's like morning cocaine, afternoon cocaine.
there was
Thompson's
no
something
morning for him. There was no morning. He would sleep from like 6 a.m. to like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And then he would get up, he would eat, he would do all of his drugs and his drink. He would start writing at midnight, go throughout the full night doing whatever he was doing. And they say that was like his routine. Now obviously not every day, and I'm sure it was very exaggerated. But like,
um,
can you imagine? That's
I
crazy.
mean, God, Thompson was a crazy dude. It makes for great reading. Like, what is it? I can't remember who published it. I have a collection of just interviews he did over the years, and like they verge between his very, very, very opinionated stance on politics to his insane just lifestyle. And he's a crazy dude. He took insane risks. I remember it was when he was doing Hell's Angels, when they weren't really happy when they realized the fact that he was writing this book and going to make a lot of money off of them. They like beat the ever living crap out of him. Like,
He was it was like a form of journalism in his stories, right? In his
yeah,
writing.
gonzo journalism, where it's literally journalism if you remove any form of objectivity, and you
Okay.
literally become part of the story.
Interesting. So would it be in like a first person?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
so you
it's
place yourself in whatever you're reporting on.
yeah, like well, not just for first person, but he writes himself into it, and he doesn't leave out any. The best way to refer to it is there's no point where he just reports on like just pure facts, like opinions factor in, his own thoughts factor in, and it really reads like a story just because he's removing any real sense of objectivity. Like it becomes very personal.
Okay, and these would be published in magazines, right? In journals.
His pieces were published in a few magazines. I can't remember if his Hell's Angels book got any like preview publication before the book actually came out.
Hmm.
And I know he did the campaign trail for a couple of elections. He wrote a lot for Rolling Stone. He pissed off so many people. And he also wrote a couple novels when he started out, because I think his method to learning how to write was he took. I know one of the books was The Great Gatsby. I think he may have done another one took another one by Ernest Hemingway, and he'd rewrite them. He'd just retype them, and he
Huh.
just literally book open typewriter and just rewrite everything he saw, like just copy it all to understand
Huh.
how these guys wrote. He was honestly he's an insane individual, very powerful writer, very opinionated. He's someone whose work I like reading from time to time, but he's not a person I would want to know in any way.
Hmm.
He looks like a huge gun nut.
Hmm.
Also, are you lagging?
No. What? Sorry, what did
Oh,
you
yeah,
say?
yeah. Sorry, yo, it's getting weird because I think I see you coming in and out. I was gonna say Thompson was also like a huge gun nut on top of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's not someone to mess with
Yeah.
because he will shoot you.
Yeah, it's crazy, man.
Yeah.
Artists in general, though, have always been kind of out there.
Yeah, they have. I mean, King had his bouts with alcohol and drugs, which I can't remember if I think it was something he said after the fact, like subconsciously, when he was writing stuff like The Shining. That was kind of coming. That's where that was coming from. These characters who had their own issues with substance abuse.
That madness.
Yeah,
That
and I
comes
mean,
maybe.
and Aaron Sorkin, who I think it was mushrooms, cocaine, like like
A
he I
blend?
yeah, like I think he did both of them, and I know he had huge drug problems. I think I know he went to rehab. I think he got an award for it, like as like creative person struggling like overcoming addiction. And then shortly after that, he was caught with a pipe full of something in an airport. And like it's just on and on and on. And I mean, what is it? The tortured artist belief, or the
Yeah.
idea of the tortured artist, where you have all these issues, and then which I don't fully subscribe to because I think they're emotionally healthy people who produce really good work.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, though they have their eccentricities. Like I've recently learned that Christopher Nolan doesn't have an email account. I don't think he has a cell phone.
Yeah.
Like
I can
how do
see
you
him having a cell
I'm
phone.
like how do you function in like don't you like what if Warner Brothers wants to get in contact with you and you're not home? Do they still
Man,
carry your opinion?
apparently the Bill Murray, he doesn't even have like an agent. He just has like a phone. And if people want to contact him, they can just leave him a message.
Okay, that's kind of badass.
That's hilarious.
I feel like that's something you've earned after making all those movies.
Yeah.
It's like I've earned the right to have you just call me. I don't need an agent. I'm me.
And he might not even get back to you. You never know. Like,
Depending on how many calls he gets, yeah. But
yeah, for real.
I don't know.
I'm
Maybe
I'm the line is reserved for people that he's worked with before, people that he would hold in high regard.
yeah. Versus me, if I'm bored, I just want to call Bill Murray.
Yeah, he probably wouldn't be able to get the number.
Yeah, probably not. Would be fun though, because I watched Zombieland too. That was really fun. They brought him back for a little bit in it.
Was that a good one?
You know what? It's one of those movies where like I love the first Zombieland. It's a good
Mhm.
movie. The
Yeah.
Zombieland Double Tap. I loved it. Like it's a lot of fun. In general, it's a really fun movie. And
Mhm.
if you like the first one, it's a treat watching the second. Like, will it go down as a classic of cinema? No, but
No.
it's really really fun. Also, I've learned that Woody Harrelson is probably one of the greatest comedic actors to have ever lived because anytime that man's on screen, I laugh. Like he is what made watching the sequel to Now You See Me tolerable.
Yeah, Woody Harrelson's really good. Really underrated, I think.
Like he's a great comedic talent, and it's a
He's
shame that the next movie I think he's going to be in is Venom 2.
Hmm.
Which, if you want superhero movies that aren't like, if you want to go superhero movies that aren't really art, I'd pick the Venom movie as partly like a principal example. That was so bad,
Man, I love Tom Hardy though.
but it's like Tom Hardy just they're like Tom just kind of go nuts, do whatever you want,
Yeah.
and he's like sure, because that was probably the strangest performance I've ever seen him give, like ever.
Have you ever seen Peaky Blinders?
I love that show, and I think I'm like a season behind.
Oh, you
It's
are.
incredible. Like
Yeah,
I think I
it's
randomly came across it, and I've enjoyed it considerably.
yeah, me too. Like one year, everyone started saying, "Oh, Peaky Blinders." I'm like, "Oh yeah, I watched that in the summer, just like casually." I stumbled across it from like Netflix or something.
It's like once you've exhausted every like major sitcom, you're like, I need something new, and that's a cool name. And I remember you were Scarecrow, which by the way, that gave me a whole new. What's his name? Cillian Murphy. I think that's what it is. That gave me a whole new appreciation of his acting ability because prior to that show, I knew him as Scarecrow from the Batman movies. Man, you are frozen. Yeah, out of curiosities, I'm pretty sure I might be frozen on your screen.